All right, today we're diving into one of the most audacious financial plays in history. I'm talking about a story of staggering risk, enormous fortunes, and a battle that literally pitted one man against an entire country's economy.
Let's just start with a number. $1 billion. That's the profit one man, the financier George Soros, reportedly made in a single day. It was a trade so massive, so legendary, that it earned him a title, the man who broke the Bank of England.
So, how is that even possible? I mean, how does one person bet against a whole country and actually win? Well, the story behind that incredible number is a true financial thriller. It's a high-stakes showdown between a legendary speculator and the Bank of England, and it's got everything: immense economic pressure, a secret recording, and a single bet that honestly changed the world.
Okay, to really get how this all went down, we first have to understand the playing field. And it was this thing called the currency cage, a system that was supposed to stabilize Europe's economies, but as you'll see, it ended up creating the perfect trap. So, this cage was officially called the Exchange Rate Mechanism, or ERM, and it was pretty much exactly what it sounds like. A bunch of European countries agreed to lock their currencies together, the French franc, the German Deutschmark, all of them, to make trade easier. The idea was, if one currency started to drift too high or too low, the whole system would kick in and force it right back in line.
Now, if you're a central bank trying to defend your currency inside this cage, you've basically got two main weapons in your arsenal. First, you can dip into your foreign reserves and just start buying up your own currency on the open market. That drives up demand and props up the price. Your second move? Raise interest rates. That makes it way more attractive for investors to hold your currency, for the higher returns. So remember those two tools, reserves and rates, because they are absolutely critical to what happens next.
All right, so this is where the United Kingdom enters the picture. In October 1990, they decide to join this system. But oh man, the timing, it just could not have been worse. See, the UK was sliding into a really deep recession. And by joining the ERM right then, they basically handed the Bank of England an impossible economic puzzle to solve.
And this slide really shows you the impossible trap they were in. On one hand, you've got the UK economy at home. It's in a deep recession, so it desperately needs lower interest rates to help businesses and people out. But on the other hand, the ERM demanded the exact opposite. To keep the pound's value high enough, especially against Germany's super strong Deutschmark, Britain was forced to keep its interest rates painfully high. They were basically choking their own economic recovery.
So, you can imagine, traders all over the world are looking at this situation, and it was a glaring red flag. You didn't have to be a genius to see this was totally unsustainable. Something had to give. And a couple of traders in particular, working at a place called the Quantum Fund, they didn't just see it, they decided to act on it in a very, very big way.
So, the story goes that in August 1992, the fund manager, a guy named Stanley Druckenmiller, he makes this huge $1.5 billion bet against the pound. He thinks it's a massive move, but when he tells his boss, George Soros, about it, Soros's response became legendary. He wasn't upset that the bet was too big. No, he was upset that it wasn't bigger. He saw this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
So what they were doing is called shorting a currency. It's basically a massive gamble that the British pound was overvalued and was about to fall. Here's how it works, in simple terms. You borrow billions and billions of pounds. You immediately exchange all of them for a stronger currency, like the German mark. Then you wait. Once the pound's value crashes, like you predicted, you use your marks to buy back all those pounds you owe, but now they're way cheaper. You repay the loan and pocket the massive difference. Simple, right?
Okay, so Soros and Druckenmiller have their bet locked and loaded, but they needed a trigger. That one single event that would start an avalanche of selling, enough to force the UK's hand. And, well, that trigger came from a very, very unexpected source.
And that trigger, it came from the president of Germany's incredibly powerful central bank, the Bundesbank. In an interview, he kinda hinted that some currencies were overvalued. The thing is, he thought his comments were off the record. They weren't. Everything he said was being recorded.
And that was it. That was the catalyst. The market heard those comments and basically interpreted them as Germany saying, hey, we're not going to prop up weaker currencies like the pound. The second that traders found out this story was about to hit the press, it was like a starting gun went off. The bet was on, and the selling began. And that brings us to the showdown. The morning of September 16th, 1992. A day that would go down in history as Black Wednesday. And on that day, The financial markets just erupted into absolute chaos.
So the second Soros hears this news from the German central bank, he goes all in. He tells his team to up the bet, increase their short position on the pound to a staggering $7 billion. To put that in perspective, that was a bet larger than the entire value of his fund.
Of course, the Bank of England fought back, and they fought back frantically. At 11 a.m., they'd jack up interest rates from 10% to 12%. But the market just saw it as pure desperation, and they sold off even more pounds. By midday, the bank was burning through 2 billion pounds of its reserves every single hour. In one last panicked move, they raised rates again, all the way to 15%. But it was no use. The dam had broken.
By the time the day was over, the Bank of England had burned through an unbelievable 15 billion pounds of its reserves, just trying to prop up the pound. And it still wasn't enough. The speculators had won.
The defense had completely failed. That same evening, the British government had to announce it was pulling out of the ERM, and the pound, well, it went into an absolute freefall. It ended up collapsing by 15% against the German mark, and even more against the US dollar in the weeks that followed.
So for the UK, this was a humiliating national financial crisis. But for George Soros, the man on the other side of that massive trade, it cemented his legend in the halls of finance forever.
You see, by spotting that fundamental flaw in the system, that impossible choice the UK was facing, Soros and his fund walked away with an estimated profit of $1.5 billion that month. It was the ultimate payoff for what was, without a doubt, one of the gutsiest financial calls ever made.
This single event completely reshaped currency trading forever. It was a stark warning about the sheer power of global financial markets. And it leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. In today's world, which is even more connected, even more globalized, who really holds the power? Is it governments or is it the markets?